The people laughing the loudest often become the first to lower their eyes when kindness reveals a kind of wealth money can never buy. The evening sky glowed with soft shades of gold as luxury cars lined the circular driveway of Victoria Collins's sprawling estate overlooking Lake Michigan. Crystal chandeliers shimmered through towering windows while elegantly dressed guests stepped onto polished marble floors carrying conversations about investment portfolios, private vacations, and exclusive business opportunities. Ethan Brooks parked his modest sedan a short distance from the entrance and smiled warmly at his wife before stepping out to open her door. Hannah Brooks adjusted the sleeves of her simple light blue dress, smoothed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and looked toward the grand house without envy or hesitation. Her calm expression reflected quiet confidence rather than uncertainty. Ethan gently took her hand. "You do not have to impress anyone tonight," he said softly. Hannah smiled. "That was never my plan." As they entered the magnificent foyer, the rich aroma of fresh flowers blended with soft piano music drifting through the elegant rooms. Victoria welcomed Ethan with enthusiastic excitement before her attention shifted toward Hannah. Her polished smile remained in place, but curiosity quickly turned into subtle judgment as she examined Hannah's modest clothing. "How refreshing," Victoria said with a carefully measured laugh. "You certainly have a very uncomplicated style." Several nearby guests exchanged quiet smiles before returning to their conversations. Hannah simply thanked her for the invitation. Moments later, Daniel Harper and Olivia Foster joined the group carrying sparkling drinks while discussing luxury resorts and designer fashion. Daniel glanced toward Ethan with playful amusement. "You have always surprised us, my friend. I expected someone who enjoyed the same lifestyle you built." Olivia looked at Hannah's simple handbag before politely asking, "Do you ever enjoy shopping on Fifth Avenue or traveling overseas?" Hannah answered with gentle honesty, "I enjoy spending time wherever the people I love happen to be." A brief silence followed before light laughter spread through the small circle. None of the remarks sounded openly cruel, yet each carried the quiet weight of assumption. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that his closest friends had already formed opinions without knowing anything about the woman standing beside him. Throughout the evening, conversations revolved around luxury homes, expensive watches, exclusive clubs, and investment returns. Hannah listened respectfully, asking thoughtful questions whenever someone shared a personal achievement, never attempting to compare herself or change the subject. Her quiet attention contrasted sharply with the constant competition for admiration surrounding her. During dinner, Victoria intentionally placed Hannah beside guests who delighted in discussing expensive lifestyles. One guest smiled politely before asking, "What designer created your dress?" Hannah looked down briefly at the light blue fabric and answered with complete sincerity, "I found it at a neighborhood shop because I liked the color." A few people chuckled behind their glasses while another guest whispered something that caused several others to smile. Hannah heard the laughter, but continued eating peacefully, thanking the servers whenever they refilled a glass or cleared a plate. One young server accidentally dropped a folded napkin beside her chair while balancing several dinner plates. Before anyone else reacted, Hannah quietly bent down, picked up the clean napkin, handed it back with a reassuring smile, and softly thanked the young man for all his hard work. He looked surprised by her kindness and gratefully nodded before continuing his duties. Around the table, the laughter gradually faded into thoughtful silence for only a moment before conversations resumed. Victoria noticed the brief exchange yet dismissed it as insignificant. She remained convinced that first impressions rarely changed. Hannah simply continued enjoying the evening with quiet grace, unaware that the smallest act of genuine respect had already planted the first seed of doubt inside hearts that had spent the entire night measuring people by everything except their character. The elegant dinner continued beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers as soft music drifted through the grand dining room, yet the atmosphere surrounding Hannah Brooks remained quietly uncomfortable. Expensive conversations filled every corner of the table. Guests compared luxury vacation homes in Aspen, private golf memberships in Florida, and recent purchases from famous designer boutiques in New York. Every story seemed carefully chosen to impress everyone else. Hannah listened with genuine interest, smiling politely whenever someone shared a personal success, never interrupting or attempting to redirect the conversation toward herself. Victoria Collins observed her with growing curiosity. She had expected Hannah to become embarrassed or defensive after the subtle jokes made earlier in the evening. Instead, the young woman remained completely at peace, answering every question with quiet honesty and thanking the household staff whenever they served another course. Daniel Harper raised his glass with a playful grin. "Hannah, if someone suddenly gave you $1 million today, what would you buy first?" Several guests smiled as they waited for an entertaining answer. Hannah thought for only a moment before replying. "I would first make sure my family had everything they truly needed. After that, I would look for people whose lives could become easier with a little help." The room became unusually quiet before a few polite laughs broke the silence. Olivia Foster smiled politely. "That is certainly a different way of thinking." Hannah simply nodded. "Money is useful, but people always matter more." Ethan looked toward his wife with quiet admiration, while Victoria exchanged another knowing glance with several friends who still believed Hannah simply did not understand the world they lived in. As dessert was served, one of the young catering assistants accidentally lost balance while carrying a tray of coffee cups across the dining room. Several cups tipped over onto the serving cart, creating a loud clatter that instantly interrupted every conversation. The young employee froze with visible embarrassment, repeatedly apologizing while attempting to gather everything together. A few guests sighed impatiently, and one quietly complained that the evening service had become disappointing. Before anyone else moved, Hannah calmly stood from her chair, walked toward the young employee, and gently helped collect the unbroken cups. She smiled reassuringly and softly said, "Everyone has difficult moments. Please do not worry. We can finish this together." Her calm voice immediately eased the young employee's anxiety. Without drawing attention to herself, Hannah neatly arranged the remaining dishes, wiped a small spill from the serving cart with a nearby cloth, and stepped aside so the employee could continue working with confidence. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute, yet something inside the room quietly shifted. Several guests who had laughed at Hannah earlier now watched her with thoughtful expressions. She had never attempted to impress anyone, yet she had become the first person to notice someone who needed kindness instead of criticism. Victoria remained seated, studying Hannah more carefully than before. She had hosted countless elegant dinners attended by successful executives, investors, and public figures, yet very few had ever interrupted their own conversations to help a nervous employee preserve his dignity. Daniel slowly lowered his coffee cup without speaking. Olivia quietly thanked the server after receiving her dessert, almost as though Hannah's simple gesture had reminded everyone of something they had forgotten. Ethan noticed the subtle change spreading around the table. No dramatic conversation followed. No one apologized. The expensive dinner continued exactly as planned, but the confident certainty with which several guests had judged Hannah at the beginning of the evening had begun to weaken. They still saw a young woman wearing simple clothes, yet for the first time they also saw quiet strength, effortless compassion, and a grace that could never be purchased, leaving behind a question that none of them could yet answer about who among them was truly the wealthiest person in the room. As the evening continued, the elegant atmosphere inside Victoria Collins's estate slowly settled into comfortable conversation, yet the brief moment involving the young catering assistant lingered quietly in the minds of several guests. The laughter that had once followed Hannah Brooks now appeared less frequent, replaced by curious glances from people who were beginning to question their own first impressions. Outside, the last light of sunset reflected across the calm waters of Lake Michigan, while inside the dining room crystal glasses sparkled beneath warm golden chandeliers. Just as coffee was being served, an elderly guest named Margaret Lawson, a longtime family friend respected by everyone present, excused herself from the conversation and stood to walk toward the terrace for fresh air. After only a few steps, she suddenly paused and reached for the back of a nearby chair, her expression showing unexpected discomfort. The room immediately became quiet. Several guests looked toward her with concern but hesitated, uncertain how to respond. Victoria quickly called for someone to contact the household staff while Daniel searched for his telephone. Margaret smiled politely, insisting she simply needed a moment, yet her unsteady posture suggested otherwise. Without creating panic or drawing attention to herself, Hannah calmly walked toward the elderly woman. Her voice remained gentle and reassuring. "Please do not rush. Let us sit down together for a moment." She carefully guided Margaret back into a comfortable chair, encouraged her to breathe slowly, and quietly asked one of the servers to bring a glass of water. Her movements were calm, confident, and respectful, allowing the room itself to become calmer. She remained beside Margaret, speaking softly and offering reassurance until the estate's medical response team, already available for large gatherings, arrived a few minutes later to evaluate the situation. After a brief examination, the medical professionals smiled reassuringly. "She appears to be experiencing temporary fatigue." Helping her sit comfortably and remain calm was exactly the right decision. Relief spread across the room. Margaret reached for Hannah's hand with sincere gratitude. "Thank you, my dear. Your kindness made all the difference." Hannah smiled warmly. "I am simply glad you are feeling better." Victoria watched the entire exchange in thoughtful silence. She had expected someone with medical training or emergency experience to take charge, yet Hannah had responded naturally without seeking praise or recognition. Daniel quietly leaned toward Ethan. "How did Hannah know exactly what to do?" Ethan smiled with quiet pride. "She volunteers at a community wellness center several weekends each month. She has spent years helping older adults and supporting neighborhood outreach programs. She never talks about it because she believes kindness should not become a performance." Olivia looked toward Hannah with a completely different expression than she had earlier that evening. The simple dress, the modest handbag, and the quiet smile no longer appeared ordinary. Instead, they reflected someone whose confidence came from character rather than appearance. Victoria slowly approached Hannah after the medical team confirmed Margaret was resting comfortably. "You handled that situation with remarkable calm," she admitted sincerely. Hannah answered with her familiar humility. "Many people would have done the same if they had the opportunity." Victoria looked around the room, realizing very few had moved until Hannah quietly stepped forward. The conversation gradually returned, but something fundamental had changed. Expensive watches, luxury vacations, and exclusive investments suddenly seemed less impressive than a simple act of compassion performed without hesitation. For the first time that evening, no one laughed when Hannah spoke. Instead, every eye followed her with growing respect, while Victoria quietly wondered how someone she had dismissed within moments of meeting could possess a depth of character that none of her wealthiest guests had managed to display. The gathering slowly settled into a quieter rhythm after Margaret Lawson had recovered, yet the atmosphere inside Victoria Collins's estate no longer resembled the confident social event that had begun earlier that evening. Conversations about luxury investments and exclusive vacations gradually gave way to thoughtful observations about Hannah Brooks. Guests who had barely acknowledged her when she arrived now found themselves watching the young woman with quiet curiosity. She had never attempted to change anyone's opinion. She had simply responded to every situation with calm kindness, allowing her actions to speak where words never could. As the evening drew closer to its conclusion, several guests gathered beside the fireplace while dessert and coffee were served. Victoria remained unusually quiet, replaying the events of the night in her mind. She remembered the subtle jokes, the carefully disguised criticism, and the confident assumptions she and her friends had made within minutes of meeting Hannah. None of them had asked who she truly was. They had only noticed what she wore and what she did not possess. Ethan noticed the thoughtful silence surrounding the room and gently smiled. "There is something all of you should probably know," he said. Every conversation paused as the guests turned toward him. Ethan spoke without pride, only with sincere admiration for his wife. "Many of you wondered why Hannah dresses simply and never seems interested in expensive things. The truth is that she has made those choices on purpose." Victoria looked at him with quiet surprise while Daniel and Olivia listened carefully. Ethan continued. For the past several years, Hannah has devoted much of her income and nearly all of her free weekends to helping at a community outreach center. She also spends countless hours caring for her mother, whose health requires ongoing attention. Whenever she receives extra money, she almost always chooses to help someone else instead of buying something for herself. The room became completely silent. Ethan gently laughed to himself before adding another detail. She has been offered better-paying opportunities more than once, but each time she chose to stay close to her family and the community she serves because she believes success means being present for the people who need you most. Victoria slowly lowered her coffee cup, unable to hide the emotion that crossed her face. Daniel quietly asked, "Why has she never mentioned any of this?" Ethan looked toward Hannah, who was thanking one of the servers for the wonderful meal. Because she believes kindness loses something valuable when it becomes a performance. Olivia felt an unexpected sense of embarrassment as she remembered every question she had asked earlier in the evening about designer clothing and expensive travel. Those conversations suddenly felt shallow compared to the quiet life Hannah had chosen. Margaret Lawson, now fully recovered, smiled warmly from her chair. "Some people spend their lives collecting beautiful possessions," she said softly. "Others spend their lives becoming beautiful people. Tonight I believe we have all witnessed the difference." No one disagreed. Victoria looked across the room at Hannah, who remained completely unaware that the conversation had shifted toward her. She was helping one of the household employees carry empty dessert plates back toward the kitchen despite being a guest herself. There was no audience waiting to applaud and no recognition to earn. She simply noticed someone carrying more than they comfortably could and instinctively offered assistance. Victoria quietly realized that every assumption she had made at the beginning of the evening had been wrong. The elegant mansion suddenly felt less impressive than the quiet generosity displayed by the simplest person in the room, and for the first time in many years, Victoria found herself wondering whether true success had been standing before her all along. Dressed not in luxury, but in humility. The evening ended with polite smiles and graceful farewells, yet no one left Victoria Collins's estate carrying exactly the same thoughts they had brought with them. During the drive home, Victoria remained unusually quiet as the lights of Chicago reflected across the windshield. Daniel Harper finally glanced toward her and gently asked, "Are you thinking about Hannah?" Victoria slowly nodded. "I cannot stop thinking about how quickly we decided who she was without knowing anything about her." Olivia Foster, who was traveling in the same vehicle, quietly admitted that she felt the same way. "I have spent years believing confidence came from success and appearance. Tonight I realized. Confidence can also come from humility." Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. The following week, Daniel suggested visiting the community outreach center Ethan had mentioned during dinner. Victoria agreed immediately, although she told no one except Olivia. She wanted to understand whether Hannah's kindness at the dinner had simply been a single remarkable evening or the reflection of the life she truly lived every day. On Saturday morning, they arrived at a modest brick community center located several miles from the city's most expensive neighborhoods. There were no marble floors, elegant chandeliers, or luxury automobiles waiting outside. Instead, families greeted one another with warm smiles while volunteers organized food donations, books, blankets, and school supplies. Children laughed in the courtyard as older adults shared coffee beneath shaded benches. Victoria quietly walked through the entrance and immediately noticed Hannah wearing the same simple style of clothing she had worn at the dinner. She was helping a young boy choose books for school before carrying several grocery bags to an elderly couple waiting near the front door. No cameras followed her. No reporters interviewed her. No one applauded. She simply moved from one person to another with genuine warmth, remembering names, asking thoughtful questions, and listening with complete attention. Daniel watched in respectful silence. "She treats every person here exactly the way she treated us," he whispered. Olivia nodded slowly. "The difference is that these people never judged her by what she wore." A volunteer coordinator approached the visitors with a welcoming smile. Recognizing Hannah's name, Victoria politely asked how long she had been helping there. The coordinator smiled warmly. nearly every weekend for several years. She organizes food drives, mentors teenagers preparing for college, visits older adults who live alone, and quietly donates supplies whenever we run short. Many people here believe she is part of the heart of this place. Victoria felt an unexpected heaviness settle within her. Everything Ethan had shared during dinner had been true, yet even those words had not fully captured the quiet influence Hannah carried wherever she went. Moments later, Hannah noticed the three familiar faces standing near the entrance. Genuine surprise crossed her face before she smiled warmly and walked toward them. There was no awkwardness, no resentment, and no reminder of the laughter they had directed toward her only days earlier. "I am so glad you came," she said sincerely. "Would you like to help us prepare lunch for the families?" Victoria looked at Hannah with quiet disbelief. She had expected hesitation or guarded politeness. Instead, she had been welcomed with the same kindness Hannah offered every stranger. Without another word, Victoria rolled up the sleeves of her elegant blouse and accepted a volunteer apron. Daniel and Olivia quietly followed her example. As they began arranging meals beside volunteers who welcomed them without knowing their names or financial success, each of them discovered a satisfaction that expensive restaurants and exclusive social gatherings had never provided. For the first time, they understood that Hannah had never been asking anyone to admire her life. She had simply been inviting the world to see a richer definition of what it truly meant to live well. Several weeks passed after that Saturday at the Community Outreach Center, yet the experience continued to influence Victoria Collins, Daniel Harper, and Olivia Foster in ways they had never expected. Their conversations slowly changed. Business success was still discussed, but it no longer dominated every gathering. Instead, they often found themselves talking about the families they had met, the volunteers they had worked beside, and the quiet satisfaction that came from helping someone without expecting recognition in return. Victoria thought about Hannah Brooks almost every day. She realized that genuine respect could never erase the careless laughter that had welcomed Hannah on the night they first met. One peaceful afternoon, Victoria called Ethan and asked whether Hannah might be willing to meet for coffee. Ethan smiled warmly before answering. "You should ask her yourself. She always appreciates honesty." A few days later, Victoria arrived at a small neighborhood cafe several minutes early. It was nothing like the exclusive restaurants where she usually entertained clients. Warm sunlight streamed through large windows while local residents quietly enjoyed conversations over fresh coffee and homemade pastries. Hannah entered wearing her familiar light blue blouse and greeted Victoria with the same sincere smile she had offered everyone else. There was no hesitation in her voice and no sign that she carried resentment from the evening at the estate. After a few moments of quiet conversation, Victoria gently placed her coffee cup on the table and took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "When you walked into my home, I believed I understood exactly who you were. I judged you by your clothes, by your simplicity, and by my own assumptions. I laughed when I should have listened. I am deeply sorry." Hannah remained silent for a moment, allowing Victoria to finish without interruption. Her gentle expression never changed. Finally, she smiled with quiet warmth. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we have been wrong." Victoria lowered her eyes. "I hope one day you can forgive me." Hannah nodded gently. "I forgave you before you asked. Carrying resentment only makes the heart heavier. I would rather spend that energy helping someone." Victoria looked at Hannah with quiet amazement. She had prepared herself for disappointment, distance, or understandable hesitation. Instead, she found compassion offered without conditions. The conversation continued naturally as they spoke about family, community, and the people they had both met through volunteer work. Victoria admitted that serving meals beside Hannah had changed the way she viewed success. "For years I believed influence came from wealth," she confessed. "Now I think influence comes from the way people feel after spending time with us." Hannah smiled gently. "Money can build beautiful buildings, but kindness builds places where people truly belong." Those simple words settled deeply into Victoria's heart. Before leaving the cafe, Victoria asked one final question. "Would you allow our group to Support the outreach center on a regular basis, not just with donations, but with our time. Hannah's eyes brightened. That would mean far more than any check you could write. As they stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight, the city moved around them with its usual hurried pace, yet both women walked more slowly. Their conversation had begun with an apology, but it ended with a shared purpose. For the first time since that unforgettable dinner, Victoria no longer saw Hannah as the quiet young woman everyone had underestimated. She saw a teacher whose greatest lessons had never been spoken from a stage, but quietly lived through ordinary moments of compassion, humility, and unwavering respect for every person she met. Autumn arrived in Chicago with cool mornings, golden leaves, and a gentle breeze that seemed to invite people outdoors rather than into conference rooms. True to the promise they had made at the neighborhood cafe, Victoria Collins, Daniel Harper, Olivia Foster, and several other friends returned to the Community Outreach Center every month. At first, they believed they were coming to help others, but with each visit they quietly realized they were the ones being transformed. Hannah Brooks never assigned anyone the easiest tasks or treated them differently because of their wealth. She greeted every volunteer with the same warm smile and simple words. "Thank you for giving your time. Someone will have a better day because you came." There were no reserved roles for successful business owners or influential guests. Daniel spent one Saturday organizing donated food into family-sized packages. Olivia helped children choose winter coats before the colder weather arrived. Victoria found herself sweeping floors, carrying folding tables, serving warm meals, and listening to older adults share stories from decades earlier. None of those activities appeared impressive on social media, yet every one of them left a lasting impression on her heart. One afternoon, after the volunteers finished serving lunch, everyone gathered outside beneath colorful maple trees while children laughed nearby. Daniel looked around at the smiling families before quietly saying, "I have attended charity galas that raised millions of dollars, yet I have never experienced this kind of happiness." Hannah smiled gently. "Sometimes people need our presence even more than our resources." Ethan watched the conversation with quiet pride. He had always admired his wife, but seeing the people who once underestimated her now learning from her reminded him that character always reveals itself in time. During another volunteer event, a young college student nervously approached Victoria. The student had recognized her from the business community and hesitated before speaking. "May I ask why someone as successful as you spends weekends here instead of relaxing?" Victoria looked toward Hannah, who was helping a little girl pack school supplies across the room. She smiled before answering. "Because I finally met someone who taught me the difference between looking successful and living a meaningful life." The student followed her gaze and quietly nodded. Later that afternoon, Hannah gathered everyone together before they finished cleaning the center. She thanked each volunteer personally, mentioning specific ways they had encouraged families, supported older adults, or simply made someone smile. She never spoke about herself. She celebrated the efforts of everyone else instead. Victoria noticed that even after months of volunteering, Hannah remained exactly the same person she had been on the evening they first met. She had not become more confident because others respected her. She had never depended on their approval in the first place. Her peace came from knowing the kind of person she chose to become each day. As the volunteers prepared to leave, Daniel quietly admitted something he had never expected to say. "I used to believe respect came from earning admiration. Now I think respect begins when we learn to admire the goodness in someone else." Olivia smiled in agreement. No one laughed. No one searched for clever remarks or comparisons. The conversations that once revolved around expensive watches and exclusive vacations had slowly disappeared, replaced by discussions about people whose lives had been touched through ordinary acts of kindness. Hannah listened without interrupting, her familiar, gentle smile unchanged. She had never tried to win an argument or prove anyone wrong. She had simply lived according to her values, and little by little, those values had quietly reshaped every heart that had once measured her by appearances alone. Winter gradually settled over Chicago, covering sidewalks with a light blanket of snow and filling the city with crisp morning air, yet the warmth growing among Victoria Collins, Daniel Harper, Olivia Foster, Ethan Brooks, and Hannah Brooks continued to deepen with every passing week. What had begun as an awkward dinner marked by quiet judgment had slowly become an unexpected friendship built on trust, humility, and shared purpose. The monthly volunteer gatherings evolved into something far greater than occasional acts of service. Business owners invited employees to participate. Friends brought neighbors. Teenagers joined their parents. Retired teachers offered tutoring. Local restaurants donated meals. Without anyone planning it, a simple outreach center became the meeting place for people from every background who wanted to serve rather than impress. One Saturday morning, Victoria stood near the entrance watching dozens of volunteers prepare for the annual winter community event. Boxes filled with coats, books, groceries, blankets, and children's toys covered the tables throughout the hall. She smiled as she noticed Daniel helping unload delivery trucks while Olivia patiently organized school supplies with several high school students. Months earlier, none of them would have imagined spending a weekend this way, yet now it felt completely natural. Hannah quietly moved through the room greeting every volunteer by name, thanking each person for coming, making sure everyone felt welcomed before the event even began. She never acted like a leader, yet people naturally looked toward her because she consistently placed others first. During the afternoon, one local television reporter arrived to cover the growing community project after hearing how volunteers from different neighborhoods had united to support hundreds of families throughout the winter season. The reporter approached Victoria first, expecting the well-known business leader to explain how the project had become so successful. Victoria smiled politely before gently pointing toward Hannah, who was kneeling beside two young children, helping them choose warm winter gloves. "If you truly want to understand this story," Victoria said quietly, "the person you should speak with is right over there." The reporter walked toward Hannah and introduced herself, asking how she had built such an extraordinary volunteer network. Hannah looked genuinely surprised by the question. "I did not build it alone," she answered softly. "People simply chose to care for one another. Every person here has contributed something valuable. I only happened to arrive early enough to open the door." The reporter smiled, impressed by the answer, but Hannah politely asked if the interview could instead focus on the families receiving help and the volunteers who had donated their time. Once again, she quietly stepped away from recognition and returned to serving meals alongside everyone else. Victoria watched the scene with deep admiration. Months earlier, she had believed influence came from being noticed. Hannah had shown her that the greatest influence often belonged to those who never sought attention at all. As the day came to an end, hundreds of donated items had found new homes, countless conversations had created new friendships, and smiles filled every corner of the outreach center. While volunteers cleaned the last tables and stacked empty boxes against the wall, Daniel looked around the room and softly said, "This place has changed all of us." Olivia nodded with quiet agreement. Ethan glanced toward Hannah, whose familiar gentle smile remained as peaceful as ever, and realized nothing about her had changed since the evening they first walked into Victoria's estate. The only difference was that everyone else had finally learned to see what had always been there, proving that genuine respect does not arrive through wealth, status, or admiration, but through a life quietly lived with unwavering kindness, humility, and love for others. 1 year passed, and the annual winter gathering returned to the same community outreach center that had quietly become a second home for hundreds of volunteers across Chicago. Snow rested gently on the rooftops while warm light poured through the windows, welcoming families, children, older adults, students, business owners, and neighbors into a place where no one asked what someone owned before offering them a seat at the table. Victoria Collins stood near the entrance greeting every guest personally, but anyone who had known her a year earlier would have noticed how much she had changed. The elegant confidence remained, yet it was now accompanied by genuine warmth and humility. Daniel Harper and Olivia Foster laughed beside volunteers as they unloaded donated food and winter clothing from delivery trucks. Their conversations no longer revolved around expensive investments or exclusive vacations. Instead, they discussed new scholarship programs, neighborhood partnerships, and ways to support families throughout the coming year. Ethan Brooks watched the room with quiet gratitude before turning toward Hannah Brooks, who was arranging books for children in a reading corner decorated with simple handmade snowflakes. She wore the same familiar light blue blouse beneath a warm winter sweater, smiling with the same gentle expression she had carried from the very beginning. Nothing about her kindness had changed because it had never depended on recognition. Later that afternoon, after every family had received the support they needed, Victoria gently tapped a glass and invited everyone to gather together for a few closing words. The room gradually became silent. She looked across the crowd until her eyes found Hannah. 1 year ago, Victoria began softly, "I believe success could be measured by wealth, status, and appearance. I welcome someone into my home with polite words but an unfair heart." I laughed because I assumed simplicity meant weakness. I could not have been more mistaken. No one interrupted. Every volunteer listened quietly. Victoria continued with visible emotion. "The woman standing before us never argued, never defended herself, and never tried to embarrass those who judged her. She simply continued living with compassion, dignity, and kindness until the truth became impossible to ignore. She did not earn our respect because she changed who she was. She earned our respect because she never changed at all." A gentle hush settled across the room before warm applause slowly filled the hall. Hannah lowered her eyes with quiet humility, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. When the applause faded, she stepped forward only because everyone encouraged her to speak. She smiled gently before saying, "If this year has taught us anything, I hope it is that every person deserves to be seen before being judged. We never know the burden someone carries or the kindness they quietly share when no one is watching. The greatest gift we can offer another person is simple respect." Her words were brief, but their meaning settled deeply into every heart. As families prepared to leave with warm coats, groceries, books, and hopeful smiles, children waved happily to volunteers who promised to return the following weekend. Outside, fresh snow continued to fall across the quiet streets of Chicago, while inside the Outreach Center laughter echoed with a very different sound than it had 1 year earlier. It was no longer laughter born from pride or assumption. It was laughter shared between friends who had learned that the richest life is measured not by what we keep for ourselves, but by what we freely give to others. And on that peaceful winter evening, everyone who had once underestimated the quiet young woman finally understood that true dignity never demands attention, because in the end, genuine character always speaks loudly enough for the whole world to hear.